Morning everyone, Derek and
Paula here.
From a guy, a girl, and a camper van. So this morning we were up bright and early with the sun because today is gonna be the best day ever. We got lots of work to do, so stick around. So right now we're at the very beginning of a 3-day long weekend because of the Canadian Thanksgiving. So we've got 3 days to do a whole bunch of work around our little homestead. So right now we're out at the garden because we've got one Hugelkultur mound, which you may recall from a previous video. If you haven't seen that, we'll put a link up here because you may want to know a little bit more detail about what we're up to right now. But as we've mentioned before, though we have this one garden that's been pretty successful, next year we hope to have a much bigger harvest. And the way we're gonna do that is by digging a whole bunch more of these things, which means a bunch more trenches, a bunch more wood going in, and a bunch more dirt being piled on top. It was a lot of work the last time we did it. It took multiple days just to do the one. So I promised Paula that if we were gonna do this a whole bunch more times, that the next time we'd rent a backhoe. But before we start digging, we better first have a look at our plans for our garden layout. So earlier this spring, we mowed a rectangular section at the edge of our field and then measured out an area 30 feet by 4 feet. This became our first Hugelkultur mound. But for the expansion, we've mowed an even larger section and then measured an area 50 feet by 50 feet. This is where we've slowly been putting in fence posts so that we can keep the deer, rabbits, and groundhogs away from next year's harvest. Each of the posts are spaced 10 feet apart except for the bottom right corner, because that's where we'll eventually be building a gate for the entrance. But we'll cover the fence construction in another video, so I won't bother going into any more detail now. So now that we see how much space we have to work with, our plan is to construct 5 more 30-foot beds beside the first, for a total of 6. And with all the extra room below them, we plan to build a 7th larger bed, approximately 8 feet by 36 feet. This is where we'll be planting corn, beans, and squash as our Three Sisters garden. As many of you have pointed out, corn plants pollinate better when more of them are grown closely together. And when planted in conjunction with beans and squash, they form a natural symbiotic relationship. But again, we'll talk more about that in a future video. Our layout will leave a 3-foot wide walking path around the perimeter of the garden and a 4-foot wide path between each of the beds. That way we'll always be able to reach every part of the garden without ever having to step on any of the beds themselves. Plus, we've left room for an even wider path going down the middle from the entrance. We left this space so that we can easily drive our lawn tractor through with a load of mulch. Now, as our regular viewers will know, everything we've done so far with our garden has been an experiment to see what works well on our property, and also a learning experience because this has all been pretty new to us. So with that in mind, we've decided to stick with Hugelkultur mounds for these 3 beds, but we're planning to try a couple of other types of permaculture for the rest. We now know that Hugelkultur works really well for our purposes, but that doesn't mean that another method wouldn't work just as well, or maybe even better. So we might as well try a few things and figure out what's best. Okay, so now that we know the plan, let's start putting it into action. So now we've laid out our measuring tape and we use some landscaping spray paint to start marking off where each of the gardens are going to be. So every 4 feet we've made a mark, and the ones that are actually going to be dug out, we've left an X to show that that's going to be a trench. And then the next is going to be a walking space, so we didn't put an X on it. So garden, walking space, garden, walking space, garden, and then the last 3 feet at the edge of our garden again. So now, from each of these marks, we're gonna have to draw another line going all the way to the other end so that we make sure that we dig them all in a straight line, and then we get to hop on the tractor again. Can't wait. Okay, so now we've got all of the lines going up as well. Unfortunately, we ran out of red spray paint halfway through, so we had to switch to black. But now we can clearly see exactly which trenches we're digging out and which spots we're leaving, and we can make sure that we dig everything nice and straight. So here's the string that we were using, just running from 2 wooden stakes one at either end, and we just kept moving it along based on the lines we already measured out, and then we just spray painted along the line. So now for the fun part. We got to remove the sod, but for that we get to use the tractor. So as you can see, we've already built the second Hugelkultur mound, but we didn't bother filming it because it was mostly just a bunch of learning how to use the backhoe. But now that we feel much more confident in how to use it efficiently, we'll show you how we build the third one from start to finish. After some experimentation, we figured out that the easiest way to remove the sod was actually just to drop the loader bucket, because it's exactly 4 feet wide, and so is our future Hugelkultur mound. So we literally just dug it into the ground a little bit and then just drove forward and then reversed and drove forward again, and eventually we could pick up a 1.5 feet or so at a time, dump it into a pile, and then come back and do it again. So now we finished pulling all the sod layer off, and that only took about 15 minutes to pile that huge pile up with this machine. What a massive difference, because when we did this the first time with shovels, that took what, like an hour and a half?
With shovels?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that is a pretty big difference. And next thing we're gonna do is plant the backhoe right at this end, and we're gonna start digging all of this out and piling the earth beside it, so that once we finish filling this with wood and everything else, all we have to do is just scoop that earth up and just drop it back into this trench. That's what we did with this one, and it worked really well. Push the arm down a little bit more. There you go. Now claw them up. There you go. Though this job could easily be done with one person when you have a backhoe like this, we still found it pretty advantageous to have the two of us working on it at the same time, because while I was pulling out all the dirt with the backhoe, Paula was sorting through all that dirt and pulling out all the big rocks. This made it a lot easier for later on whenever we started filling it all back in. We didn't have to sort through it then. It was dealt with already. So we just ran into a little bit of a snag. This lever doesn't want to grab anything anymore. It's just all flopping around. So I pulled this little rubber housing out, and I noticed in here, it's probably a little hard for you to see on the camera, but in here there's supposed to be the linkage to the little piston that controls the backhoe moving up and down, and unfortunately it has come unscrewed. So that means right now we are screwed. So at first we were pretty nervous. We thought that we weren't going to be able to finish the job, and then I realized that down in here, again, you can't really see it, but the linkage actually just screws back in. So I'm going to try and pull off all this housing, and then hopefully I'm able to get in there with a wrench and actually reattach it, and then hopefully we'll be back in business. Okay, so I've got the housing off now. I'll set that over here. It was just held on by these 4 bolts. So this is the linkage I was talking about. It's just a little ball joint, and it is supposed to screw into right there. And so I guess it must have just vibrated loose. So I'm going to do my best to screw that back in, and then hopefully that's all it takes, and then we'll be up and running again. All right, so I just screwed it back in, and this lever actually holds pressure again. So that should be a good thing. I also tightened up the other side just to make sure that it doesn't fall out while we continue to work. So now I'll put the housing back on, and we should be good to go. So I just finished digging out the trench with the backhoe, and so now you can see it is 30 feet long, 4 feet wide, and about 1.5 feet deep the whole way along. It's not quite as neat and tidy as it was whenever we dug it all by hand with shovels, but I would never do it that way again. So now it's time to throw in some wood and then start burying it. And unfortunately, looks like that sun's starting to go down, so we better hurry. Once again, it was super helpful to have two of us working on putting the wood in the trench, because as I was loading the backhoe and then dumping it, Paula was there to guide me, as well as sort through the wood afterwards to make sure that it was all laying smoothly and there was no big gaps or anything left over. This was especially advantageous for me because it meant that I got to just keep driving the backhoe and Paula did all the heavy lifting. After all the big logs were put in place, we then covered it with some brush as well. Just smaller branches because they break down a little bit quicker so that the plants can pull out those nutrients a little bit sooner. The big logs will take obviously much longer to break down over time. Once all the wood was in, we covered it with all of the sod that we pulled off initially. So this literally was just picking up the pile with the backhoe, dumping it in place, and then making sure that all the sod was actually upside down, so the root side up. That way the grass doesn't just regrow up through your garden in the future. Instead, all those roots and the little bit of foliage left on the grass just rots and turns into built-in compost, so that your garden basically gets fertilized from the inside out naturally. So it is officially dark out, but we've finished putting the sod layer back on upside down, and we've also put on a huge layer of freshly cut grass as mulch. And so now we are ready to put this pile of dirt back on. And luckily we've got headlights on the backhoe, and we've also got headlamps like the one that I'm using right now to light up this video. And speaking of headlamps, Paula's currently wearing a headlamp that we've been using for 5 or 6 years for backpacking. It's made by a company called Petzl, and we absolutely love it. But recently we've also been sent a new headlamp from a company called Through Night. It's the TH10 model, and it is awesome. Let me turn it on for a sec so you can see the difference.
Wow.
So this one is about like 8 times brighter than the Petzl headlamp is. So this is kind of like having a spotlight on your head. And this is what we'll be using to finish the garden tonight. We'll probably talk about this a whole bunch more in a future video, but we figured we'd at least show you what we're using right now to see what we're doing. Alright, so it is the next day, so I figured I'd come out now that it's daylight again and show you what we did in the dark last night. So here's the first Hugelkultur mound that we made earlier this spring that we got a really great harvest out of. And then here is the new one that we built off camera while we were still learning how to use the backhoe. And here's the one that we built on camera last night and finished in the dark. So we've still got to round these out with a rake and shovel and cover them with hay as a nice big thick layer of mulch and stuff like that. But we already covered that in another video, so we'll put a link on the screen for anybody who missed that one or wants to watch it again. But we figured there's no point in going over it again for you right now. Unfortunately, all of the lines that we painted got mostly worn off because of all of the tractor tires rolling all over it. You can see there's still a little bit of it here and there, but we laid out these stakes while we still knew what the measurements were, so that we wouldn't lose our spot and have to redo all of this whenever we put in the next few gardens. So you'll notice that we've got 3 mounds here and then this big empty space. But like we mentioned, we've got something else planned, another type of permaculture that we want to try out. So we're going to do 3 equal size beds right here in this space, and then a much larger one over here where we're going to put corn and squash and beans and that kind of stuff. But those, we're going to use a different method, and we will show you that in another video really soon. Just as soon as we can find the time to. So we had that backhoe for about 3 days. Whenever we rented it, the charge was for 24 hours, but because we rented it on a Saturday and the rental location is closed on the Sunday, we got it for an extra day for free. And because this was the long weekend for Thanksgiving in Canada, they were closed on Monday as well, which means for the price of 1 day, we got it for 3 days. So it was a heck of a good deal. I would say that if anybody out there wants to rent one of these things to do a big job like this, and you've never used one before like us, plan on renting it for at least 2 or 3 times longer than you think it might take. They're easy to use, but there is definitely a learning curve. We got much faster and smoother with it by the end, but in the beginning we fumbled around a lot. Plus, there's also just a novelty factor. You're going to want to do all kinds of stuff. We discovered that there was probably about another 30 or 40 things that we would have loved to have done had we had it for a week or 2. So we will likely be renting it again in the spring. I just can't get over how much easier it made everything. Whenever we dug this first one in the spring, it was just brutal how much work that was to do it all by hand with just shovels and rakes. But because of that, it gives us a much better appreciation for the value in the rental of this unit to be able to do the other 2. We did them easily 10 times faster than we did the first one, and the results are about the same. As I mentioned last night, they're not maybe quite as neat and tidy, but once we rake them out a little bit to smooth them off, they're gonna look identical, and I think they're probably gonna work just as well. If we were to do this again, we could easily do these 2 Hugelkultur mounds in an afternoon. But unfortunately, it took us about 2 solid days as beginners. Plus, last night I also went back into the woods and opened up a little bit more of our trail in the forest. I pulled out some fence posts from the old corral from the previous owners when they had cows. We pushed some rocks in our rock garden up by the cabin. We did all kinds of different things with it. It was so much fun, and we were out here till about 10:30 last night just getting our money's worth out of it. So that's it for today, but we've still got a ton of work to do to get our garden expansion ready for the spring. We've still got the 3 here and another big one that we're going to put in here as well, and there's also something that we're thinking of planting outside the fence as well. So keep following along because we've got lots of work ahead. See you guys again soon.